So it appears that Russia has had a massive, massive population decline in the last year. And it seems that it's going really, really badly as it's being hurt pretty bad by coronavirus. Now, Russia, their population decline has been talked a lot about since even the collapse of the Soviet Union and post-World War II. But Russia finds itself in a very weird situation. And it seems because Russia, outside of St. Petersburg and Moscow, nobody really has any money in Russia. It's very, very poor outside of those two cities. So basically everyone else is very poor in that country. The country itself is very poor. Per capita GDP is awful. I couldn't believe it, honestly. When I had read that their GDP was 1.7 trillion, I genuinely could not believe it. It was absolutely insane. The idea that a country with a 1.7 trillion GDP is like the competitor with the United States, it just goes to show you how much of a waste of time all the Russiagate nonsense was. I don't know why the U.S. is so focused on Russia. Russia is a joke. They're nothing. Why would you waste your time on that? The U.S.'s GDP is like 20 trillion, almost 21 trillion. The real competitor is China. They have a similar GDP. So, that's the real competitor. Russia is nothing now. But Russia, I think, finds itself in a weird situation, and it has a high death rate. It seems to be a pretty low birth rate. Now, what's weird is, typically when you look at like a more impoverished country, usually they'll have high birth rates. Like, usually poor people will have a lot of kids. At least, in Afghanistan, especially things like that, you'll see a lot of children. But I guess for whatever reason in Russia, there is not a high birth rate. I don't know if it's just due to culture. Maybe the culture is different than typical impoverished nations, possibly. Also, low immigration numbers. So, I know that Russia is very keen on keeping their sense of whiteness or whatever, Russianness. It's going to come back to bite you. I mean, it is what it is. But it finds itself in a very bizarre situation where, it says Russian population decline largest ever recorded. In the past year, Russia had its most significant peacetime population decline of all time. Since last October, Russia's natural population has declined by 997,000, according to the Washington Post. The natural population is determined by the difference between the country's death rate and birth rate. That's almost 1 million people, and I think Russia is something like 120 million people. Losing 1 million in terms of the net loss, that's net loss. Obviously between the death rate and the birth rate. It says, quote, "The overwhelming share of this decline is associated with an increase in mortality, which is also reflected in the dramatic drop in life expectancy that fell by about 4 years." Jesus Christ. Alexei Raksha wrote in a Facebook post about the change per the Post. In turn, an overwhelming share of this increase in mortality is due to COVID-19. The drop comes as Russia battles a brutal fourth wave of COVID-19. On Wednesday, the country recorded its highest daily COVID-19 death count, with 984 fatalities reported, an increase from Tuesday's high of 973 deaths. Despite a rising death toll and reports that 11% of the country's COVID-19 patients were in serious condition, the country has refused to lock down. That's very interesting that they've refused to lock down. Now, here's the thing, right? All right, it's an oligarchy, obviously. It's a really shitty one at that. The U.S. is obviously an oligarchy as well, but it's obviously a much better one than the one Russia is. I guess after the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia just essentially sold off all of its, billion-dollar industries to just whoever could buy it cheap, didn't even have to have good loans. So it's not a real economy in that sense, and obviously Putin is running it like it's some kind of centralized thing, essentially. And so there's not really any real economy in Russia. Russia, even the Soviet Union, would have been absolutely nothing without its natural oil supply. That's why it ended up collapsing, was because once oil prices tanked, the economy tanked. That's essentially all it has in terms of real economy, is just oil, natural resources. And a country can't control how much natural resource it has, literally called natural resources, right? You have to come upon it. It's just your geography, whatever luck is. So it doesn't have, they're not a real economy. There's no real economy there. It's a very poor country. And it's just, it's not in good shape in general. And, this population decline was estimated for a while, and I guess it's going to continue going down. I'm sure that I don't know if Putin's going to try to start incentivizing people to start having kids. Obviously, ways to incentivize people to have kids are, things like, literal financial cash incentives. Like, we'll literally pay you money every month for having a kid. If you don't know, like a country, until automation kicks in, I mean, automation should change this, I guess. But for now, before automation is able to kick in, a country needs enough young to middle-aged people who are able to support the retirees. So you can't really have like a social security system without, I think you need like 2 to 4 working people to support each retiree, but right now it's only like 1 to 2, but 2 I think is on the low side in terms of how much you need. But I think it could work. But right now it's like 1. So all countries are facing this problem, but other countries have things like immigration to take up that role. So even in China, they're in a horrible situation where it's going to cause a collapse, and they had that one-child rule that was absolutely awful and is going to bite them in the ass, and is going to bite them in the ass in the near future. Russia also seems to be having a population decline, but a lot of Russia is not actually livable. But it's very, I guess, maybe it's culturally homogenous. It doesn't have much, immigration. So it's not, I guess, the healthiest country. Their age expectancy went down by 4 years, which is a very significant drop. I don't even know what the life expectancy there is. I don't know if it's from smoking or alcohol. It just doesn't seem like people really have, I guess, access to healthcare, maybe, or don't have a, generally speaking, healthy lifestyle over there, smoking and drinking and all that stuff. So it is in a very bad shape. Russia is in a very bad shape, and the country is just simply in pretty big trouble in general. I think that the best case scenario for Russia is a situation where Putin is no longer in power. You try to have like some sort of real, capitalism going on there, obviously mixed with social democracy. We want to have free healthcare and strong welfare system, but you do need real free market situation where people can actually create industry. It's just the best way to go about it. But having a situation where basically all of your billion-dollar industry is owned by like a very few people who purchased them at shady times of bad loans, and just whoever was first come first serve post-Soviet Union collapse. It's not a real economy, and Putin is just a clown in general. I don't even know what he's doing, but obviously Russia's history, throughout all of its history, has never had any sort of democracy or freedom. I guess it started with the nobles being, not a real thing and being knocked out by leadership and, Alexander and all that stuff. So I don't know what's going to happen over there, but I don't know. It just seems like, people are too scared to even talk about Navalny over there, so I don't really know what's going to happen over there, but eventually Russians have to be like, this shit is awful. Like, it's awful, and you have to revolt at some point. I just don't know if they are, but population decline, lots of poverty outside of St. Petersburg and Moscow. There's no money there. Everybody's broke. Everyone's very poor. An absolutely atrocious GDP of 1.7 trillion. Imagine what the per capita GDP is. Oh my god. Very, very bad situation for Russia, man.